list, cigarette hanging out the mouth, typewriter. I was a heavy smoker, but I took the decision. I came to the conclusion this is not good for my body.
Stephen King said that it was a neurotransmitter and enhancer that he suffered when he stopped smoking. Well, so many writers.
Helped him write.
Like when you were a writer, why did you smoke so much as a writer?
It helps. Yeah, it does. It definitely did. It definitely did help, as does marijuana. But the fact is that the point that I want to make is that if the state was really interested in helping us. This is how the war on drugs is presented. We're concerned about your health, so we're going to send you to prison. We're concerned about the harm this drug is doing to you, so we're going to send you to prison. What's more harmful, the harm the drug is doing or being sent to prison? It seems to me pretty obvious that the being sent to prison is a much more harmful thing that's being done. If the state was really concerned about harm, then the solution is not to criminalize people for taking drugs. The solution is to present them with very good information which they believe. Part of the problem is that the state has become to be regarded as so corrupt that any message emanating from the state about drugs is not believed anymore, completely disbelieved. So once again, we come to this issue of adult sovereignty over consciousness. And our right also to make mistakes with our own body if we do that. That's what I believe we're here on this earth to learn and to grow and to develop. And we have to have adult responsibility to do that. Always astonishes me in America, where you have the Republican Party, which is strongly in favor of individual freedoms, that it's often Republicans who are the ones who are most anti-drugs. I feel the drugs is a Republican issue. I think that any true Republican should absolutely champion the right of every adult individual, if they choose to do so, to explore their own consciousness with any drugs they choose.
Yeah, there's no real parties anymore. It's just a mix mash. I mean, Obama is just as much of a Republican as any Republican that's ever been in office.
I've seen this happening.
It's weird assimilation.
Yeah. It is.
It's just you're fucked no matter what. It's either the same person.
Basically, because really our society is being run by gigantic faceless bureaucracies now. And those are much more dangerous than anything else because they don't even have a figurehead. They just continue, they roll on and they run people's lives.
But the aspect of society where powers that be are trying to control people's mental territory, this is not a new thing. This has been going on for a very, very long time.
Going on for a very long time.
The newest incarnation. I mean, we had witch burnings where
exactly.
It's a very old.
Exactly. I would say that in our societies today, drug users play the same role as witches played in Europe in the 16th century.
Absolutely.
That's fundamentally what's going on. Exactly. They're an internal enemy which the society can be mobilized to hate, because that's what the state does. It makes people hate and fear and suspect other people, because then they want to rely on the state for their defense and their protection. It's a game, it's a mind game, and it's been going on for a very long time, and it happens that the current victims are drug users. The word, it's interesting that language itself has been deployed in this war, so that you very rarely find the word drug separated from the word abuse. That you never find the notion of a responsible use of drugs. You find only the notion of abuse of drugs. And so it's become impossible almost to speak about drugs without incorporating this notion that there's some abuse is taking place.
Yeah, and the idea that you can actually benefit from them is an alien thought.
Completely alien, very, very much hated by our society. And yet, the research is coming through. We've had the research in the last year with psilocybin, easing anxiety of terminal cancer patients, MDMA with post-traumatic stress disorder, fantastically successful result.
And cancer, apparently. Have you seen that, where they're saying that super doses of MDMA may treat cancer?
Makes sense. All the joy and love that you feel just kills all the bad stuff.
I know. I mean, these I believe that, Aldous Huxley called the psychedelics gratuitous graces. They're something that nature just gave us for free, a kind of grace to allow us to experience something else. And
didn't Huxley coin the term psychedelic? He's the one who came up with it.
Quite possibly, yeah.
It was Huxley and I can't remember the other person. Man. Yeah, I think that they were trying to come up with a word. They had another word that they were going to use for it, but it sounded too unscientific.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, definitely.
Psychedelic's the perfect word. They nailed it.
They nailed it?
They nailed it, yeah.
What do you subscribe to McKenna's ideas about the stoned ape theory. You know, that theory that human beings may have actually evolved from the lower primates because of the fact that we ate mushrooms.
Yeah, I came to that idea. I'd like to say, Terence McKenna, one of the great minds.
Fascinating.
What
guy.
a wonderful man.
Amazing person.
What a wonderful man. An incredible loss that we lost Terence. He was a remarkable individual, and I never met him, unfortunately. But I love listening to his voice.
Me too.
I
yeah.
love his voice.
I have a whole section of my iPod is all Terence McKenna lectures.
Sometimes
amazing.
we go down to Brazil sometimes to drink ayahuasca, and sometimes late in an ayahuasca session, as you're beginning to return to this reality, it's nice to play a bit of music or a little bit of voice, and sometimes we play Terence McKenna, and I just remember one line was about how psychedelics dissolve boundaries, and he says, you know, they'll dissolve boundaries between you and your cat, even between you and your washing machine. No, he had wonderful ideas, and he very intuitively, very far ahead of his time, grasped the notion that this sudden advancement of humanity had to do with psychedelics. What it did was it broke our rigid behavior patterns that we were stuck in and unable to change, and it opened us up to new possibilities. And you see this remarkable event taking place after 50,000 years ago, definitely to do with psychedelics. Now, you know, since that time, there's a parallel track, which is the academic work on cave art and psychedelics, which is Professor David Lewis Williams of the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. And he has absolutely taken it beyond intuition and totally proved, without any doubt whatsoever, that all of the cave art was inspired by visionary experiences on psychedelics. There's just no doubt about it at all.
How do you prove that?
You prove it by the nature of the art itself. It's rich with what are called entoptic phenomena, certain patterns, zigzags, grids, hexagons, honeycomb patterns, internested curved lines. The caves are covered in all of these. Go around to, you know, the rock canyons in Utah, you'll see the same thing. Rock art all over the world is influenced by visionary experiences. And then classically, the absolute defining characteristic is the appearance of beings or entities in the art. And those entities are typically half human and half animal. It's called a therianthrope. That's from the Greek therion, which means wild beast, and anthropos, which means man. And this is one of the definitive aspects of deep visionary experience, is encountering entities who communicate with you and who are often encountered in this half man, half human form. So it's interesting that work done in the 1960s with, for example, mescaline, they found that the volunteers were drawing the stuff they saw, and one of the volunteers drew a man in a business suit with the head of a fox.
Wow.
That was an entity that had come and spoken to him in the trance-like state. No different from the man with the head of a lion and the body of a human being that you find in Hollenstein-Stadel Cave in Germany from 32,000 years ago.
So what do you think is going on there? Do you think that you're dealing with entities that don't really have a form that we can understand, so they present themselves in some cartoonish combination of things that we're
really
aware
weird.
of?
Yeah. I think that, and I'm going out on a limb here, but I think that we're dealing, I don't believe consciousness is generated by the brain. I believe the brain is more of a receiver of consciousness. I think that's a really important distinction. The mainstream model of consciousness that we have in our society today definitely sees it as produced by the brain, the same way a factory makes cars. So if you smash up the factory, the cars stop being made. Ergo, if the person dies, the brain dies, consciousness is just blinks out, gone, finished. That's the mainstream view. But the other view, that the brain is a transceiver or receiver of consciousness, that it is manifesting, it's the junction box that's manifesting consciousness on the physical realm, that raises whole different possibilities. Then when you destroy the receiver, the signal is still there. Just as if you destroy a TV set, the TV signal is still there. You get into all kinds of possibilities from that. So the suggestion that I derive from that is that consciousness is fundamentally non-physical, but that for certain reasons, and they may be very deep and very mysterious, consciousness has created realms in which it is possible to manifest physically, because in a physical realm you have all kinds of consequences to your actions that you would not have in a non-physical state. A physical realm may be a very useful place to spend time if you're an ancient soul who wishes to learn and grow and develop further. And that's how I've come to see it. I think we, and that's how all ancient spiritual traditions see it, that we incarnate in these bodies in order to have the experience of life on earth. But we don't die when these bodies die. These bodies are like a suit of clothes that we're wearing for this incarnation.
I've always subscribed to the idea that creativity, when I'm at my best and most creative, and when I'm performing, doing stand-up comedy at my best and most creative, I feel much more like a passenger than I do a driver.
Yes.
I feel like when I write my best stuff, I have no idea where it's coming from. I'm not even really there.
Absolutely.
I'm just moving my fingers, and it's coming to me, and it's not even me doing it. And it sounds ridiculous, and you could say that, well, it's because really the ego gets in the way of creativity because you're always worrying about yourself. And if you could just put the ego aside, then your mind can work better. And I see that argument, but I don't really, it feels like it comes to me in these great bursts of ideas that I never considered before. And I'm like, well, where is that? Is that, maybe that's really something that I'm figuring out a way to tune in.
Yeah, you're tuning into it, and you're becoming a channel for the material, for your own material. Your consciousness is running the show, but your consciousness is not limited to this realm, and it's drawing down material from elsewhere. I've had the same experience with my writing. The more that I intellectualize the process, and that's particularly true since I've turned to fiction, the more that I intellectualize the process, the harder the writing becomes.
Right.
And the sooner I let off that intellectual control and just let it flow, the better it gets.
It's so strange how it comes in waves, though. It's almost like you
Yeah.
can't keep tuned in to the spiritual realm for any long period of time.
No.
I shake it off. I know after like a few hours of writing, my writing just starts to turn to shit. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, I guess it's off now. It's back to me. Now it's me writing.
And the right thing to do at that point is actually to
Close
say,
the laptop, walk
close
away.
the laptop, go and have a break.
Yeah, save your work and try again tomorrow.
Yeah.
But it's universal. You know, there's a Stephen Pressfield book, The War of Art, that deals with the concept of the muse, and it's a fantastic book. And I used to buy stacks of them and give them to people. I gave you one, right?
Yep.
It's an
Thank you for
amazing.
recommending that. I'm a big fan of Pressfield. I didn't know he'd written that book, so I'm going
It's
to
a
read
brilliant book. You know, I think I have a copy of it, and I will give you one. And it's the brilliant thing about it is it's really no nonsense, but it's all about, it's a no nonsense, put the work in, force yourself to do it, don't make excuses, put the work in. But then it's also about the muse. It's also about the idea that you are just sitting there and putting yourself in a position to tune into it. You just have to show up. You show up, you move your fingers, and let the muse come to you, and that the muse is real.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you, I mean, I have been a non-fiction writer all my life. I started out, as I mentioned, in journalism. I moved into ancient mysteries, but it was always non-fiction. You look at a book like Fingerprints of the Gods or Underworld, the book about our diving adventures, you'll find that there's 2,000 footnotes, you know. They are, I hope they're readable, but they're also, you know, detailed, researched documents. And that was the kind of writer I was until I encountered ayahuasca. And when I encountered ayahuasca, I started working with ayahuasca in 2003, and the reason I started working, I had one psychedelic experience in 1974 with LSD, and after that, it was an amazing experience, by the way. I had a most incredible night at the Windsor Free Festival in England. I spent the whole night wandering around. I kind of traveled back in time. It was like being in a sort of medieval encampment. It's just incredible. But when I came out of that experience, I thought to myself, I was 24 then. I thought, if that went the other way, that was a really powerful experience. If that went the other way, I'm not sure how I would handle it. I thought it might really fuck me up, and I got a bit scared. And I'd heard stories of others who'd had scary experiences, and I thought I'm not going to do that again. And I didn't. I didn't take any psychedelics from the age of 24 until, let's see, 2003, when I was 53 years old. And the reason that I started taking psychedelics again was because initially it was my research project. I was writing Supernatural. it was clear that the cave art had been influenced by psychedelics. Here was something I could experience for myself. I've always felt as a writer, I shouldn't be writing something if I'm not in it myself. I have to experience it.
Which is why when you were writing Underworld, you learned how to dive.
Diving, and ended up doing huge numbers of dives all around the world. It's the way that I work, and therefore it was logical for me to investigate psychedelics once I started to write Supernatural. And I wanted to investigate them in a shamanic setting. And I looked around and researched the subject, and it became clear that the Amazon was the place to go. And ayahuasca, with thousands of years of indigenous use in the Amazon, was a very, very interesting substance indeed to investigate. So, you know, I went down there and started to drink ayahuasca. Ayahuasca worked changes on me in quite a number of ways. It's made me a more thoughtful and reflective person in some ways about my behavior and the impact of my behavior on others. I've still got a long way to go on that. They say in the Amazon that ayahuasca is a school. Don't expect, instant enlightenment. Actually, all enlightenment is hard work. And the hard work with ayahuasca is integrating the revelations that it gives you. Because one of the things that ayahuasca does is she does show you where you've been cruel and hurtful and unkind to others, and she shows it you from the other person's point of view. It's a lesson that you learn, but then integrating that into your own behavior in daily life is actually really difficult. Lifetime of bad habits are very hard to change, and work has to be done in order to do that. So ayahuasca has helped me to begin on that path. I do not claim to have reached any form of perfection. Very far from it. I'm a very imperfect, frail human being. But I have at least been set on the path that I believe is a more positive one. But then something else ayahuasca gave me. And it happened because I asked for it. I'd reached a point where I felt that I didn't want to go on with the investigation of the lost civilization subject anymore. Not because I'd lost interest in it or because I'd turned against it, but because I felt that I'd taken it as far as I personally could. After Santha and I had done 6 years of scuba diving all around the world and literally put our lives on the line and had revealed a great deal of stuff underwater that people didn't know about, I felt actually I don't know where I take this next. There are a lot of young, energetic people out there. I would like them to take it on now, for where I took it from, and I wanted to look for a change of direction, and I wanted to challenge myself as a writer, and I'd always wanted to write a novel. So, down in Brazil, over a series of 5 ayahuasca sessions, I asked ayahuasca, "Can I write a novel? And if so, what would I be writing about?" And something amazing happened. In those 5 sessions, I was given the entire story of the novel that I ended up writing, which is a novel called Entangled. The whole story, the characters, their dilemmas, the time travel aspect of the story.
Were you just frantically writing it all down, or were you trying to remember it?
No, it was very, I wasn't even trying to remember it. It was just very, very clear. It was very clear that I was to write a story and that it would involve 2 young women, one in the Stone Age, one in the modern times, and that they would be entangled, that they would be connected through consciousness, and that they would be involved in a battle of good against evil. And certain scenes came through very, very clear to me and stuck vividly in my mind. So as soon as we'd finished in Brazil, I went back to England and started writing.
So when you ask ayahuasca, can you do it, and what would it be about? Do you think that that ayahuasca wants you to do this? Because if you do something like that, you have to. I always think of any work that I put out, whether it's even writing a blog or putting a funny thing up on Twitter. You send out this signal, and then this signal is going to affect who knows how many people in a positive way, especially something that they really enjoy reading, like a book. And people can say, like, why would ayahuasca want you to write a book? Because some books are fucking awesome. That's why. And that feeling of getting really hooked into a book and really just loving it. I haven't read a good novel in a while. The Strain was the last one that I really liked for a while, but then hated. You know, I loved the beginning of it. That's that vampire one, the Guillermo del Toro book.
I haven't
Anyway,
read it.
my point is, that feeling, there's a lot of positive energy associated with something that's really entertaining and gripping.
Definitely,
do you think that's why?
it's a highly effective way of communicating. I don't know whether ayahuasca did this For me, but they often say there's a song that I forget the song. Was it the Rolling Stones? You don't always get what you want; you get what you need. Ayahuasca does that. She tends to give you what you need, not always what you ask for. I have set intents at the beginning of sessions, and I found myself going in a totally different direction. But these 5 sessions were different. It was very, very clear. Here is a story. Go home and write it. It was I felt compelled to do it.
So if they affected you in that way, if it created this huge effect on you, think about what would happen if it was legally available.
Exactly.
If the people were so. Then you see how the war on drugs is actually suppressing human evolution.
Yeah.
If this is, it seems like
Exactly.
what you're saying that. Throughout time, these psychedelics have been wide. Do you think the Egyptians were taking psychedelics?
Definitely.
What psychedelics were they taking?
Particularly the blue water lily, Nymphaea cerulea, which is a potent psychedelic. And William Emberton at the State University of California has published detailed research on the blue water lily and on its psychedelic properties, and it was certainly used. They were journeyers. When the ancient Egyptians explored the mystery of life after death, they were not, sitting in some scribal room just making this stuff up. They were investigating. They were exploring. They were separating their consciousness from the body, and they were entering other realms, and they were coming back and giving a detailed report about what they encountered there.
The first I'd ever heard of any of that was from John Anthony West's work and the work on the Temple of Man,
Yeah.
which is really fascinating, that there's a temple and each area of the temple signifies like a part of a human being, and there's a whole area about the pineal gland, and the Egyptians were, they called it the seat of the soul, and that they believed that the pineal gland was your connection to the afterlife,
And hey, they were right.
Yeah.
This is the mystery that DMT, which is the active ingredient of ayahuasca, is generated by the pineal gland.
they believe that though, but
Yeah,
that
it's
hasn't
not proved.
really totally
It
been
was Rick
proven,
Strassman's
right?
hunch, but something in our bodies, and the pineal gland is the most likely
Right.
suspect.
That's a big sticking point with
is
critics.
generating DMT, because
Right.
the presence of DMT in the human body is not in dispute.
Yes,
Where it's coming
absolutely.
from is in dispute.
Right.
But its presence in the body is not in dispute.
It just
And
sounds cool if it really comes from the pineal gland.
it kind of sounds kind of
If
cool.
it comes from the third eye, for
Particularly,
real.
since the pineal gland was originally a sense organ, and so the suggestion would be that it's still a sense organ. It's a kind of sixth sense, which the lens that it uses is DMT.
And what people don't realize is that in certain reptiles, it actually has a retina
It does,
and a
yeah.
lens.
Yeah, and it's
I mean,
light
it is-
sensitive.
It is a fucking eyeball.
Yeah.
It's like
It's light sensitive, yes, in reptiles. In humans,
Oh,
it's
in
not.
humans, no.
It's deep. It's sunk
Right.
deeper into the brain, but a very mysterious organ. And I would still say, you're right. It's not proved. I would still say the most likely candidate for the generation of DMT.
Well,
within the body.
Strassman is working on figuring that out right now. They're working on
Yeah.
more detailed studies to try to
Excellent.
exactly pinpoint the location.
Excellent.
It's where it's created.
I'm glad that's happening. I mean, the point that you were making just now. I think that by cutting these ancient plant allies out of our life, and by demonizing them and creating this atmosphere of fear and hatred around them, this is a suicidal path that our society is taking, and we only need to look at the past in order to realize that that is true. There is a danger in the human species that we get locked into a particular frame. And right now, we are locked into the technology frame. Of course, we're advancing technology very, very, very fast. But that doesn't mean we aren't locked. We're locked into one frame, and we're not thinking outside of that frame. And we can see the consequences of being locked into that frame, which is our world is in chaos.
Right.
Our world is in a state of hatred and fear and suspicion right now. There's all this horrible stuff going on, and we are literally on the edge of destroying ourselves. And there's never been a time in the human story when we've more needed to break out of our rigid patterns of behavior and start thinking about things from a different point of view. And nature has provided us with the means to do so, and those means are our plant allies.
right.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating concept, and the concept that human beings are working against themselves,
Yes.
and they're working to keep things fucked up and make them more. And that the only way to sustain a society as complex and large and invasive as the one we currently live in, the only way is to do it the way we're doing it. And that if all of a sudden psychedelic drugs were introduced and then materialism was, sort of pushed in the back burner and spiritualism was something that people, started really understanding and appreciating their connection more, who the fuck's going to go to work?
Yeah,
Who's going to be killing all the chickens we need
things
for
would
chicken
become,
McNuggets?
Yeah, things would become very different.
Yeah.
But the fact is that our existing economic model is falling apart at the seams anyway, and people are living in misery and doubt and chaos and confusion because it's just not working. It's not working. The whole thing is not working. Any society that can stand back while the Amazon jungle is burnt down at the sort of country-sized rate every year, this is an insane society. We obviously live in a demented society, completely insane.
A lot of people aren't even aware of how crazy that looks if you watch it and you see documentaries on it online of the mass amounts of forest that they're chopping down. It's bizarre.
And that's why it's interesting that this particular agent, ayahuasca, comes from the Amazon.
Yeah.
I can't help feeling in the Amazon they strongly believe that an intelligent entity lies behind the ayahuasca vine. They always speak of her as she, most of the cultures do, is using the vine as an access point to humanity. Oh, I've just lost my thread. How did I get to that?
Well, no,
we were
the
talking
idea is
about
it comes from the Amazon, which is being destroyed.
Yeah, yes,
by
exactly,
humans.
exactly. That at the very time when our Western technological culture is responsible for mass destruction in the Amazon, which it is. And by the way, it's a problem that could be easily solved. We don't need to destroy the Amazon. We really don't need those soybean farms in the Amazon to, feed cattle so that people can eat hamburgers. We much more need the rainforest.
Right.
So at the very time that the Amazon is under threat from the Western way of life, which has infected almost every culture on the planet, at that very time the Amazon is sending out its emissary in the form of the Vine of Souls, who is kind of extending her coiled, sinuous self all around the world and reaching into human consciousness everywhere. Because ayahuasca is being drunk all around the world now.
Everywhere. I know. So I've met someone on Facebook who takes it regularly.
That's a cop.
No
That's a cop,
way.
and you're going to jail.
No, that's no cop. He knits what are they called? The shibobo, or there's a name.
The shipibo, yeah.
Shipibo. He knits these patterns. They knit the exact things you were saying that are on the cave walls, like the honeycomb patterns
They
and
do,
stuff.
yeah.
So they create these beautiful quilts. Is it quilts?
They do,
make?
yes.
That are just incredible depictions of what apparently the ayahuasca
Ayahuasca visions, of the geometric aspect of that.
Do you ever think of how much you play a part of that? Does that ever focus in on your mind? I mean, your instincts obviously were to produce this book and to talk about it very openly and honestly, and to do interviews like this and have discussions like this where you talk about it. And this right now is going to reach 500,000 people. Right. They're going to consider what you're saying and they're going to look into it and they're going to go, "Whoa! Do you really think that there's some fucking vine that you can take from the jungle that allows you to communicate with the spirit world?"
I feel some
the
responsibility in this area.
Let's explain to people what it does for noobs, for people who are not aware of what ayahuasca is.
And the first thing I'd like to say is that ayahuasca, and as a matter of fact, all psychedelics are very serious business. I personally do not believe that psychedelics are appropriate for recreational activity. I think if somebody chooses to do that, that's their body, that's their choice, but I don't think it's the right thing to do. We need to treat these amazing substances with respect. And it's anybody who's worked with psychedelics will know absolutely that the set and setting in which the psychedelic is consumed is as important as the psychedelic itself.
Absolutely.
What you've prepared, what you are looking for from the experience and the company in which you take it and the reason for which you take it are definitely going to color and affect the experience. And I think it's a mistake to use these powerful agents of consciousness work for recreation. There are other great things for recreation and other great sensual substances, but the psychedelics are not for that purpose. And if somebody wants to have a really bad trip and have truly horrific experiences with psychedelics, take it in the wrong setting, and you can be pretty sure that's going to happen to you sooner or later. So first thing I would say to people with all psychedelics is be careful. This
Respect it.
Respect, deep respect for this. This is a very serious thing you're engaging on. Therefore, find a find a space that can be protected. Find somebody who knows what they're doing, who can sit with you and who can oversee the and bring a ceremony to the table. Let's not just sit down disrespectfully and consume the substance. Let's bring a ceremonial aspect to it. And I would say with ayahuasca, I know that quite a number of people now have started to get the ingredients on the internet and brew up their ayahuasca. I honestly think that's a mistake. There are people who are enormously experienced working with ayahuasca. They are the shamans from the Amazon. More and more Westerners are being trained by those shamans. Those Westerners are returning to Western countries and are creating a new form of shamanism relevant to the urban and industrial context of the West. If you really want to work with ayahuasca, seek out somebody like that. Better still, if you can get the funds together, go down to Brazil or go down to Peru and work with the masters. But
how do you find the masters if you want to do that?
Well, it's all word of mouth. There is a huge network. I'm often reminded of sort of underground sects at the end of the Roman Empire, like the Gnostics, being persecuted by mainstream Christianity, where everything was done by word of mouth. It's like that with ayahuasca now. Generally speaking, if you feel drawn to the vine, do some serious research on the subject, and you will find your way to the right people. There are some charlatans working in this field. There are in all fields, but there are also some very good people. And do some serious research first, and look into the subject and find the right person, somebody who's deeply experienced, who understands the vine, and work with them, and you can be sure you're going to have a much more worthwhile experience.
Whatever series of events led you to go there and take those substances and have these visionary experiences and then relay them, do you ever feel as if you were compelled, that you were brought to it, like this is, like you have a purpose? Do you feel that way?
No. If so, it's like the rest of the course of my life, a series of accidents. Like I flew into that city in northern Ethiopia in 1983 and found myself in front of a monk who said he had the Ark of the Covenant behind him. It turned the direction of my life. And okay, I decided that after I published Underworld, which was my last book on the lost civilization issues, I had always been interested in human origins, and that's why I decided to write Supernatural. But when I got into the subject, I found that the story didn't get interesting until 50,000 years ago, and it got interesting because of psychedelics. And then, so it was an accident that led me to that. Then, well, obvious, the next research conclusion was that I had to go take some psychedelics, and to do so in a shamanic setting and learn about it. So it was a series of accidental decisions kind of led me to that process. So I guess I don't feel called or chosen, but I found myself in the hot seat.
Do you feel obligated though, because you know so much about it?
I feel obligated. I feel a responsibility, which is to share with others that these agents can be transformational, and that they can be incredibly helpful. But that they are also extremely powerful, and that they must be treated with respect.
And they're real. And here's the thing. Everyone is running around looking for magic. Everyone is running around looking for a religious experience. You can have that. You really can. It is a real thing. It doesn't care whether you believe in it or don't believe in it. It's not dogmatic. It is a legit thing.
Oh, yeah.
And if you take it, you'll have an experience that you cannot believe is real and available. Yep. You cannot believe that it's so easy that you drink this substance and all of a sudden you literally enter into some different dimension.
Yeah, that's right. It is real, and that's why it's really not a matter for intellectual speculation.
Yeah.
It's a direct experience that one can have, and then what you make of the experience is really what matters.
It's almost like the people who ridicule it. You're like, when people mock mushrooms, like I've even talked to Michio Kaku, who's this amazing physicist and this really brilliant guy, and I was on the Opie and Anthony show, and I asked him, "Have you ever done mushrooms?" And he said like I was a fool. He was acting like I was a fool, like I was a silly person. No, I need my mind to be intact and all this stuff so I can work on physics.
And since he's never done mushrooms, how can he know what it does to his mind? This is prejudice at work.
I'm like, my God, man, what if it was real? If it was real, would you trust me? Would you, if I told you that there was some real thing and you take it and you're going to be in communication with some insanely wise entity from some parallel or constantly surrounding you dimension, would you just try? Would you just try it? You convinced?
See, that's the problem that we're talking about here, is because the Michio Kaku, he is a genius, but he's
Super
also
genius.
been conditioned. And so now imagine if a genius came in contact with something, because right
Yes.
now this spirit, whatever you want to call it, it's right now the majority of a lot of the people it's contacting are like 16-year-olds in trailers who are like playing Xbox.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
it's like I am trying to communicate
Yeah.
high level information. Why
Yeah.
are you sending me these idiot kids?
to be fair, I have to say that I'm not sure that's the case with ayahuasca.
No, I think that's mushrooms.
for quite a
though.
whole number of
Mushrooms for
reasons.
sure.
Mushrooms for sure, but it's not the case with ayahuasca.
Yeah, it's too difficult.
Ayahuasca is really a mission. I mean, you have to brace yourself. Ayahuasca is hard work. Ayahuasca will make you vomit. It will give you diarrhea. They call it the purge in the Amazon, and it is an enormously effective purgative agent. Take my word for it.
We still haven't explained to the noobs, to people who really have no idea what we're talking about. What ayahuasca is an orally active version of DMT, and that these amazing people from how far does it date back? How many thousands
There's
of
proved
years?
archaeological evidence for the use of ayahuasca going back more than 4,000 years in the Amazon.
And so somehow or another, 4,000 years ago, out of hundreds of thousands of different plants, right? They figured out I combined the vine of one with the leaves of another, and
Sophisticated piece of chemistry that they're doing.
explain to people what it is.
Okay. So the ayahuasca consists of 3 ingredients. One of them is water, the medium in which it's brewed, and the other 2 are a leaf. That leaf is from a plant called Psychotria viridis, is the botanical name. They call it chacruna in the Amazon. And that leaf contains pharmacologically pure dimethyltryptamine. It contains DMT,
Which your own body makes.
which your own body makes. And with DMT, you have a problem because DMT is not orally active. And the reason that DMT is not orally active is that we have an enzyme in our stomachs called monoamine oxidase. And monoamine oxidase switches off DMT on contact. What they did in the Amazon jungle was that they found out of you're right, there's 150,000 different species of plants and trees in the Amazon.
Oh my God.
They found the one other that contains a monoamine oxidase inhibitor.
Jesus.
That's what the vine contains. The vine actually does not contain the psychedelic ingredient. It contains the ingredient that allows the psychedelic to become orally active.
So do you think they just ate the two of them at the same time once and had some crazy experience and went, whoa,
I've
write this
asked
down?
shamans about this, they all say the same thing. The spirits taught our ancestors to do this.
When these guys are getting blasted on ayahuasca for decades upon decades, though, do you think they can really recall exactly how they learned all this?
Well, no, they didn't learn it in their lifetimes because it was already
Right.
old knowledge to them. They're speaking of their ancestors.
And they literally say that the plant spoke to them, right?
They
and
say the plant
told them
spoke
how
to
to do it.
and reached out to them and said, put this together. With
And it
this."
had to be it had to be at least as recent as they figured out how to harness fire.
Yeah.
You know, and make buckets.
You need to cook it.
You need so you need a metal, correct? Like
No,
you need a pot?
no, you could-
What kind of pot do you cook it in? You can use ceramic and
You
cook
could
it in
use
that?
ceramic. Yeah.
So it could predate metal.
Yeah, definitely predates. metal.
Definitely predates
Yeah,
metal.
Yeah, no doubt about that.
It's an amazing thing that they've combined. Do you think that it's not orally active because it's in so many different plants that if it was, that people would just be eating it and getting high on DMT all the time?
Could be so. Nature is our friend in these matters. Nature looks after us, and that may be the case. That it's not so widely distributed. The mystery is that it is present in quite a lot, actually, and that mixed with a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, you end up with an orally active substance.
And would that work if you wanted to? And I of course 100% agree with you that you should go to a shaman if you're
Yes.
going to do this experience.
Yeah.
But if you did have that leaf that you were talking about and just a classic MAO inhibitor, whatever it was, and you took that and ate the leaf, would you then have the experience?
would.
It's very
and-
dangerous, though.
Yeah, it's a kind of dodgy thing
Especially-
to do. You would have, but there are what they call ayahuasca analogs, which and even pharmahuasca is being spoken of now, which does precisely that, which uses a pharmacological MOAI, with DMT. I think personally we don't need to go there because nature has provided us with this beautiful and incredible possibility in the ayahuasca brew in these 2 different plants. Interestingly, it's not impossible to drink ayahuasca legally in the United States because the battle is already being fought here. In Brazil, the ayahuasca shamanism has come out of the jungle and into the cities, and it's taken form of several what you would call syncretic churches, which are mixing elements of Christianity with elements of traditional shamanism. So the best known are the Santo Daime and the Unia de Vegetal, which both use ayahuasca as their sacrament. I've sat down with the Unia de Vegetal group in Brazil and drunk ayahuasca. They were the most charming, thorough, professional, hardworking people I could ever have hoped to meet. They bring their children to the sessions. They start their children on ayahuasca at the age of 14. They have a completely different view of psychedelics to the view that we have. They believe that it's a really helpful and important experience for humanity to have this. And fortunately, the government of Brazil agrees with them, and it doesn't persecute them for doing this. So they have formed established churches. And those churches have members in the United States. And I think it started in New Mexico. The matter was taken up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, yes, if you're a member of the Unia de Vegetal, you can drink ayahuasca legally. Now, that actually, for somebody who wants to work with ayahuasca, is something that I would recommend. I personally I'm not drawn to established churches of any kind. I believe that spirituality doesn't require a church. And a hierarchy. But the fact is that the Unia de Vegetal and the Santo Daime both know what they're doing with ayahuasca. They absolutely know what they're doing, and they are present in the United States, and they are drinking ayahuasca legally in the United States.
Strassman told me he met with them in New Mexico, and he said they're all wearing outfits and they're drinking ayahuasca and singing songs about Jesus. And he's like, they're on these really, really strong ayahuasca trips, and they're singing songs about Jesus. And he was like, what the fuck are you people doing down here? It's such a strange hybrid of things.
It's a very strange...
It's a Trojan horse for ayahuasca.
Hybrid. I mean, interestingly enough, if we separate Christ off from the monstrous bureaucracy called the church, you do find an interesting spiritual teacher at work, and I suspect through ayahuasca they're getting closer to the true spiritual teachings, and more important, ayahuasca is not mediated by a priesthood. Ayahuasca is your own direct experience of the spirit realm. That's really important. Whereas in most mainstream religions, the priesthood is telling you what to think. They are the intermediary between us and the divine. In the case of ayahuasca, the brew is the intermediary, and it plugs us straight into the divine.
It sounds like a badass church to join.
I used to love taking acid in college and reading the New Testament. That was one of my favorite things, is getting really, really high, tripping, and then reading the Gospels, because it is a very, very psychedelic text. The book of John, it's almost when you're it's hard enough to read when you're sober, but when you're tripping, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was made flesh, or it's just this. What is that?
Yeah.
Then you start thinking someone wrote this. Like, this wasn't. Someone really meant this when they wrote it. And then you're like, what did they mean?
Ago.
Yeah, a long time. And it's very, very trippy. So I can totally understand how being on ayahuasca, from what you described the experience as, and mixing that with Christ symbols could be pretty amazing.
Well, along the line with McKenna thought, you're familiar with John Marco Allegro's work and the whole idea of the Dead Sea Scrolls?
The second mushroom and the cross, yeah, very much so. And again, this is another thing that has been erased from history. But the fact of the matter is that if you go into early Christianity, what you find is a mushroom cult. No doubt about it whatsoever. No doubt about it. In fact, there are even depictions of the tree in the Garden of Eden, and those depictions show a mushroom. They show specifically an Amanita muscaria mushroom, not a psilocybin. An Amanita muscaria, also a hallucinogenic mushroom. So when the entity called Yahweh or Jehovah or whatever he calls himself, drove Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden. He was driving them out of the Garden of Eden because they'd done a mushroom trip.
Wow. Totally makes sense. And then the apple, even the word for apple also means red, and that the mushroom, the Amanita muscaria, was a red mushroom, and that this is what they ate. I mean, it makes sense. The food of the gods, and the forbidden fruit.
It makes total sense. And actually, I don't believe that we can understand any spirituality without dealing with altered states of consciousness. This is again something that's been lost in the modern world. You don't find in most of the mainstream religions much altered state of consciousness going on. But if you go back to the origins, you find altered states of consciousness are deeply involved. Now, I'm not saying that those altered states of consciousness were always caused by psychedelics. There's other ways to get into deeply altered states of consciousness, including starving yourself, fasting, austerity, certain kinds of rhythmic dancing. But definitely altered states of consciousness were involved. So in the case of Christianity, it's St. Paul on the Damascus Road. You know, he has this blinding revelation which completely turns his life around in a totally different direction. Benny Shannon, who's the professor of psychology at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, has made a very powerful case that Moses in front of the burning bush is really a psychedelic experience that's being described there. And you're sitting in front of this bush, and it's kind of moving and glowing, and a voice is coming out of it and speaking to you. It's a very psychedelic experience, and he even further argues that Moses may have been drinking an ayahuasca analog, Syrian rue and Mimosa hostilis. I think these are two plants which contain the same ingredients as are found in the Amazon, the DMT and the MOAI, which grow in the Middle East. So that's possible too.
I've even heard scholars connect the acacia tree or the acacia bush with a potential source of a psychedelic experience, because apparently it's rich in dimethyltryptamine.
Some
and that a
acacias
burning bush, that like somehow or another, like this was, they had synthesized DMT from this and burned it, and then he has this experience.
Yeah.
So they're calling it a burning bush. Well, sort of. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, if this bush that is common to that area actually has DMT in it.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
With the whole
It's
thing
an interesting idea.
becomes different.
And so you begin to realize that when you scratch the mainstream religions, you get down to base ground before the money men and the bureaucrats stepped in and took it over. You find visionary experiences are at the heart of it. They're at the essence of it. And then later on, those visionary experiences become banned and illegal, and nobody's ever allowed to have them again.
No, when I want to go back to something you said earlier, that you said you have problems with technology, and I think sort of a lot of people subscribe to the idea that technology sort of, even though it brings people together and it connects people, it's sort of pushing people apart too, and it's making people become sort of desensitized to a lot of things, and they alienate themselves and sit at home and play video games. And do you ever consider the possibility that technology is a life form in and of itself? Do you ever consider the possibility that we are somehow locked in some symbiotic relationship we are the worker bees creating this new life form, and that technology, artificial intelligence, which we're absolutely working on creating, will eventually be the next stage, something that's not hindered by the monkey flesh, that really cannot evolve as quickly as the technology can?
I see no reason why that should not be the case. I think that, since I personally believe that consciousness is not generated by the brain, but is an independent entity which chooses to immerse itself in physical form, I don't see why that entity shouldn't choose to immerse itself in mechanical form either. In any highly organized system, I don't see why consciousness should not manifest through that system.
Right. Why are we thinking that it only is going to work in a collection of bacteria and cells?
Yeah.
This bag of bacteria is the only one that works.
Yeah.
Covered a symbiotic, relationship between who knows how many different types of things in your body.
Yeah.
E. coli and all these different things on your skin, and and viruses that you carried for your entire life.
Yeah.
Have you seen the? It's on the internet. It's a video where they took the two artificial intelligence machines and let them have a conversation.
Yes,
with
they
each
started
other.
lying to each other.
They start lying. But
I haven't seen that.
yeah, it's hilarious.
It's amazing.
But within a minute, they're talking about God. Within a minute, these
wow.
things are talking about God, and that was the first time I realized that. I bet that our idea of this robot that the people make is more like Terminator. You know what I mean? This like the kind of like emotionless death machine.
Yes, exactly.
But maybe if something's super intelligent, the first thing these machines are going to start considering is their source. And they think, oh, the humans made us. And they're going to think, who made the humans and where did these ideas come from? But they're going to process the ideas we're kicking around here at a mega speed. And that's going to produce the new religion, or that's going to produce the next big whatever. Jesus is going to be a robot. The next thing is going to be a machine.
See, I just don't have any problem at all with the notion of consciousness incarnating in a machine. That seems to me perfectly reasonable. And besides, there's many machine-like functions of the human body. I mean, we are
Very
kind of
much so.
machines too.
Yeah, we are machines. There's
Yeah.
a video we've talked about before about watching traffic go back and forth on a high-speed camera, slow motion rather, or sped up rather throughout the day. That it looks just like cells and blood cells going down an artery.
Definitely, and it's very interesting. I mean, you get to the issue of the origins of life, and of course you're touching on deep religious issues. So were we created in some way? I think that the conclusion I'm coming to is that the universe manifests organization and life wherever it can as a medium in which consciousness can immerse itself, and that this may take many different forms and shapes, but the key that what's driving it is consciousness and the need for consciousness to manifest on the physical plane. I mean, I'll make a trivial example, but I think all of us have had this experience, with our computers, where somehow there's some kind of interaction between you and your computer in some ways. It seems that I remember once it was the most curious thing. I had just got a new computer, and my old computer had increasingly annoyed me because when I was when I'd finished the document on Microsoft Word, it told me that I'd made new changes which I needed to save, which I hadn't done. It kept saying, "Do you want to save the changes that you just made?" And I hadn't done that. And finally, with other glitches on the machine, it got so annoying, I decided to get myself another computer. And that computer was working fine. And I was sitting in front of it one day and I was thinking how awful it would be if it started manifesting that same fault. And instantly, the same fault came up on my computer. It did that. So I couldn't help feeling
That's
that.
just shitty Microsoft coding.
That's just a piece.
But it was reacting to, nevertheless, the way it reacted to my thought was odd. And animals, most people would argue perhaps humans have a soul, but animals don't have a soul. I think we're all soul. I think soul, consciousness, is the essence of everything. And I think it manifests in all forms.
Are you
We're
aware
just
of-
incredibly lucky that we have manifested in human bodies, because we've got this body with its equipment is an incredible opportunity for learning and growing and developing. And we've got much better opportunity to learn and grow and develop than a fruit fly or a cockroach does.
Have you ever looked in any of Rupert Sheldrake's work where he
Yes, I
talks
know
about
Rupert. Remarkable man.
fascinating
Yeah.
work and the idea that everything has some sort of memory to it,
Yes. Yeah.
and
yeah.
perhaps even a consciousness to it.
Yeah.
That's the
I believe it's so.
morphogenetic field.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. And he's doing really good science on really metaphysical subjects right now. One of the few people who's doing that. So he's looked at phenomena like the sense of being stared at. People know when they're being stared at, even when they can't see the person who's staring at them. And the phenomenon of animals knowing when their master is going to come home, even when the master himself doesn't quite know yet.
So he's studying that.
He's studying that in a very scientific way, and he's producing statistically significant results which show that these phenomena definitely do exist.
What's
And
his
boy, do people
explanation for
fight
that?
him tooth and nail.
I
I've
bet.
read some of the critiques of his
Yeah.
work. It's so angry.
Yes.
Oh, people get so
People
frustrated.
get very angry because, again,
Yeah.
it's kind of throwing the existing paradigm upside down, throwing
Yeah.
it in the air and saying that we're all connected by these morphogenetic fields.
And it's not
that's
showing a perfect connection either. It's showing a measurable one. It's showing
Yeah.
there's something there. There's something there, and it's probably increasing and evolving, just like our ability to communicate was grunts and noises, and then eventually evolved into the written word, and and now CDs and MP3s. I mean, it's all evolving, and our ability to sense when people are staring at us is probably something that's evolving. There's probably energy that comes off of you when you look at me, and I can sense it when I'm looking away.
Yeah.
It makes sense. I mean, it totally makes sense.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's so strange. It's so strange that these are all things that people so struggle to consider. And that if you do talk about them, and you're a serious guy, but if you talk about them, you run into Kooksville.
Oh, yeah.
Now all of a sudden you went so deep into Kooksville that you wrote a book about Mars.
I did,
And
yeah.
this is where you really take a chance.
Yeah, I lost a lot of my readers there.
Did you?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah, but it seemed to me an interesting subject that was worthy of exploration. And that book was called The Mars Mystery. It was written with Robert Bavard and John Grigsby. And
No, this is the one. I bought it, but I did not read this one. Does this have a lot to do with Cydonia and the face on Mars and all that stuff?
Actually, much less than you'd think. But we try to set those in context. I do think Cydonia is extremely interesting. What my part of that book was mainly about cosmic cataclysms. It's clear that the planet Mars has been subjected to the most horrific disaster, and that there is some scientific evidence which suggests this may have been pretty recent, like the last 20,000 years. I mean,
Wow.
half of the planet is like a mile higher than the other half. So if you imagine you take a little ball and you cut a line around its equator, and then you peel off the outer layer of the lower half, and then you leave the upper half as it was. There's a cliff a mile high, runs all the way around Mars, and something dramatic and disastrous happened to that planet. There was definitely water on that planet, flowing water, and something took it away. Very, very horrible cosmic cataclysm occurred. So it was struck by a gigantic asteroid or comet, most likely. And we have these odd ruins, or what look like ruins, which NASA behaves very oddly about on the planet Mars. And I just think it's an extremely interesting mystery, and I decided to try to put my mind to work on this mystery and see if I could add anything to the debate.
What do
I
you mean
thought it's
behaves
interesting
oddly?
until
Huh?
What do you mean
Well-
behaves oddly? Sorry.
Sorry, which
NASA behaves.
Oh yes, well, because NASA has consistently ridiculed the notion that there might be intelligently created artifacts on Mars, and that seems to be a most unscientific proposition. We have our photographs. And on the basis of those photographs, it's not good to assume that they are monuments or that they are not monuments. We need to keep an open mind. We were talking earlier about the Yonaguni underwater monument. I mean, you can actually bring two geologists to that monument. You can put them in front of it for half an hour, and they'll come away with completely different opinions about what it is. So how can we form really useful opinions on the basis of photography alone?
You know who fucks this up? Hoagland.
Well,
That guy goes too deep. He gets too crazy.
What does he
Richard
say?
Hoagland, he's one of the guys who's invested a huge chunk of his life to proving that Cydonia is an artificially created complex. And he makes these giant leaps and these weird connections where he measures like random distances between points and shows that they have a direct correlation between distances that can be measured in Egypt and the Giza Plateau. But when you try to follow where he's going, you're like, God, this is just riddled with confirmation bias. It's riddled with this idea that you're trying to find this connection. It's like, yeah, there's some stuff there that looks unusual. The face. The face kind of looks like a mountain to me, but what's odd is the shape of it. It is odd that it's kind of symmetrical.
I actually beg to differ. I think that Richard Hoagland's work's important, and I think he's shown great courage in putting his neck on the line. Whether he's right or whether he's wrong, this is a subject that's worthy of exploration.
I certainly agree with that, but I don't agree with how he approaches things sometimes.
No,
He talks
sometimes,
on
but
the-
sometimes what happens is you get this polarization when you get extreme academic positions. No, we will not listen to this. We will not believe this. We do not accept any of this. It's total rubbish. Mm-hmm. It tends to make you more extreme on the other side as well. You get
crazy from the resistance.
yeah, and you need to you need to keep on pushing.
So he needs someone behind him giving him a back rub. So settle down, Richard. Let's not get crazy.
I'd like to
it's a
say
fucking pyramid.
in my opinion, Richard is a good man and a good researcher. I think he's done important work on Mars, and those who put Richard down may be eating their words in 10 or 20 years' time.
It's me. I'm ready. I'm ready to eat my words.
You're gonna eat words.
Listen, I'm a comedian. I'm sorry. I'm a professional shit talker. I can't help it. And there's something to be poked fun at, especially a guy who believes, there's a face on Mars and all that. There's some of the things that I think are very compelling. 5-sided pyramids or some
Yeah.
other structures.
I'm not saying he's right or he's wrong. I'm saying the question needed to be asked, and it needed to be asked forcefully,
Right.
because it's up against resistance, and it needed to be asked in a way that would engage the public imagination.
And when you say what you said earlier, it doesn't seem unreasonable at all. If you say that half of Mars is like literally destroyed a mile lower, well, obviously something cataclysmic happened. And then the absolute proof, they've already found that there's water on Mars and there has been flowing rivers. There's all sorts of evidence of that. Why not structures? Shit, if there's structures here, how amazing would it be if just 50, 60,000 years ago there was a goddamn civilization right up there on Mars, for real, and
Exactly.
that we were existing at the same time they were existing. person, and that we had parallel development.
And could there be some interaction? This is an interesting question. It's a question worth asking. It's a question, and I'm glad that somebody was prepared to devote half of his life to exploring and investigating, even if he's wrong. I'm glad that he was prepared.
It's
to do
not
that.
even that he's wrong. It's just he goes crazy Art Bell on you. Where he absolutely knows, and this has been proven, and you're like, oh.
Like I say, it's the
I hear you.
polarization effect.
It totally makes sense. I mean, I would imagine it's got to be incredibly difficult to be taken seriously with any of this stuff. And you have shown incredible bravery in putting forth all this stuff. Because
I've taken a lot of shit for this.
I'm
stuff.
sure you have, man.
A lot. I mean, the worst was really being set up by the BBC in 1999.
I saw that. I was going to bring that up if it came up.
I mean, that, in a way, I suppose it's a kind of oblique honor that BBC Horizon, which is their flagship science program, chose to spend $750,000 destroying my reputation. But that's what happened. Now, 6 weeks before I heard from them, I got a call from a friend in television, and he said, "Graham, you're going to get a call from Horizon, and they're going to ask you to appear in interview on a show about you, and here's my advice: say no. They're going to stitch you up. The whole thing is intended from the beginning as an operation to destroy you.
What's the motivation?
And you will not get a fair hearing." And he said the best thing you could do is just not do that show. So when they rang me up, I immediately said yes.
What was their motivation for destroying you?
Well, the motivation was clear, and I learnt about this afterwards, which was a group of academics from various universities in Britain had written to the BBC and said, this man Hancock is leading our students to question our archaeology, and he's totally irresponsible, and he's just writing popular books for the public, but he's having such an impact, he needs to be stopped. And we need a program about him which really shows how full of shit he is, basically. That's what was done. So, and that was the agenda of the program from the beginning, was not to give a fair hearing to the ideas that I'd explored, but to demonstrate that I was full of shit. And it was very difficult to get any kind of fairness in that situation, especially when in the cutting room dirty tricks were played. And that's why Robert Bauval was also on that program with me, and he and I took the BBC to the Broadcasting Standards Commission, and it was the first time in 35 years of broadcasting of Horizon that they were found at fault. They were found to have produced an unfair program. We listed 10 points of unfairness. Only one of them was accepted as unfair by the Broadcasting Commission. Nevertheless, it was the first time in the history of that program that they were actually found to have been deliberately unfair.
Do they have to make a retraction?
And they were obliged to re-edit the program and produce a second version of it, which was fairer in quite a number of ways. I actually think that the other 9 points we raised were right as well, but the 10th one was the one that we really caught them out on.
What was that on?
John, well, this was to do with the Orion correlation and the fact that they had not presented our side of the story. They'd simply presented the academic side of the story, and they had not allowed us to answer. This was unfair. So the impression was created that we had no answer to this objection.
I saw the documentary, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
It was horrible. It was a real attack piece. But then I also read your response to it, which really kind of covered every single area that they...
Yeah.
And then you read your response, you go, oh... Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really amazing that they were able to put together that sort of a biased bullshit piece on you.
But my response, was read by a tiny fraction of the people who actually saw the show, and that show actually did have a devastating effect on me.
Still to this day, somebody put it on my message board when I said that you were going to be on the podcast when it was being discussed. Somebody put it on the message board, but luckily someone else had your response to it, and then it was bantered back
and it was
forth.
interesting. John West actually pointed out at the time, because he wrote a letter to the BBC too. The BBC were they were trying to say, oh well, only one of the 10 points was unfair, so that's not too bad. And the point John West made was, no, that's the only point that you were able to really get caught out on. It's like they caught Al Capone out on tax evasion, but it doesn't mean he was innocent of all the other things he was accused of.
Yeah, John Anthony West gets stuck on the outside because he doesn't have a degree, right? Is that what's going on with him?
Yeah, he's not a professionally qualified Egyptologist, but he's the best Egyptologist I know.
It's brilliant. His Magical Egypt DVD series is incredible.
Wonderful. John's a great man.
I
He's a
watched
great
that
human being.
DVD series no less than 20 times over and over. My wife was she was yelling at me. She's like, I can't believe you're watching Magical Egypt again. Like, she was like, you're crazy. You're a crazy person.
Yes.
I'm like, this is fascinating. Do you know what they knew? You know how much they knew? This is incredible. Look what
No,
they've done.
John West has done fantastic work on Egypt, and anybody who's traveling to Egypt, get hold of John West's Traveler's Key to Ancient Egypt, which is by far, by a planetary distance, the best guidebook that's ever been written on Egypt, because that will plunge you into the mystery of Egypt in a way that no other book does.
Yeah,
Can I
his
point
his
something
work
out
is incredible.
Real quick
Please.
about Mr. Hancock. You go and do ayahuasca ceremonies in the Amazon and deep sea diving in dangerous ruins.
He's a real Indiana Jones, man.
That's what I was gonna say.
Yeah.
This is Indiana Jones. This
For
is
real.
as close. Like you're a prime candidate for someone who's probably gonna get sucked into some kind of vortex or something.
Yeah.
You might just vanish sometime.
that
It might
might-
just happen.
It is an
That might
incredible
happen, yeah.
resume when you think about it. The fact that the description of those dives, man,
It's
about the
amazing.
current.
But the BBC thing, the reason I bring that up is because it's not as though you're just studying foggy pictures or you're just looking at it or reading information and then coming up with some idea. You're down under the water looking at this stuff firsthand.
I've walked the
Yeah.
walk. I've walked
Yeah.
the walk. I've put my life on the line, and I've made an honest and sincere attempt to provide some balance to the grotesquely imbalanced picture of our history that is presented by mainstream archaeology. This is what I fundamentally see my role as being. You know, I'm portrayed by the BBC as this person, you know, who's selling these wild theories to the public through, I don't know, some kind of glib magic. But actually what I see myself as is somebody who's saying, hang on, there might have been another way. Things could have been different. The way that we're being told things were, there's enough problems with that to raise some questions. And I'm going to look at those questions and I'm going to document them and examine them and let's see what they come to. I do not insist that there was a lost civilization. I think it's highly probable. I think it has been missed by the mainstream. And so what I tried to do was provide balance to a very biased picture. Rather than try to completely overthrow the picture, I'm simply trying to balance it. And that's never been seen. And I feel in that area I was treated very unfairly. But hey, the BBC Horizon experience was a really good learning experience for me. I needed my ego taking down a peg or two. and
That's a psychedelic experience in and of itself, right?
in and of itself, yeah. You know, so I was ready for ayahuasca to kick me up the ass.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, man. I can't thank you enough. This was such a huge treat for me. It's like I said, your book, The Fingerprints of the Gods, really just changed the way I looked at everything. Changed the way I looked at human history. Changed the way I looked at the academic study of human history and what people are willing to to believe and not believe, and how much they're willing to throw everything that they've learned aside or push it aside, or everything that they're teaching. It's amazing. It's amazing work. For people that are skeptical, you need to just look at some of the photographs. Look at some of the Baalbek. Is that what it's called?
Baalbek in Lebanon,
Yeah,
1,000-ton megaliths.
You just
tons.
need to see them. It doesn't even. How tall are they? They're like insanely tall, like 10 feet tall and
Oh no, much more than that. The huge megalith in Baalbek's going to be 100 feet long.
100 feet long, one stone.
One stone.
And where was it cut from?
Weighs more than 1,000 tons. Not far. That was quarried quite locally. But 1,000 tons, you know, come on.
And what is the explanation, the academic explanation for that?
They say that temple was built by the Romans as a temple of Jupiter, and that the Romans moved those big stones. But I would say that what happened was that a much older culture created that big stone structure, and that on top of it, the Romans built the temple of Jupiter.
So 10,000 plus years ago, something happened.
I believe so. I think it was the end of something. 12,500 years ago was the end, not the beginning. That was the time when the meltdown of the Ice Age was at one of its most extreme periods. The actual meltdown of the Ice Age took 10,000 years to unfold, but within that 10,000 years, there were 3 or 4 episodes of gigantic flooding where you had 30-foot rise of sea levels very rapidly, virtually overnight. You consider what a 30-foot sea level rise would do to our civilization today. It would wipe out every coastal city. I mean, look, America is still reeling from Hurricane Katrina. Imagine what would happen if every coastal city went under 30 feet of water. It's enough to destroy any civilization.
So it was a climate change thing, you think it was? Or
Yeah, it
do
was
you-
certainly a climate change, but you know, the cataclysmic explanation of ice caps is to do with pole shifts, and to do with the mechanism called Earth crust displacement, which was first proposed by Charles Hapgood, and I go into this at some length in Fingerprints of the Gods. The notion that the outer crust of the Earth, rather like the sort of skin of an orange, could move around the fruit, the inner core of the Earth, that the crust could move. And therefore, in Hapgood's theory, ice forms on areas of the crust that are close to one or other pole. That makes sense, the poles are cold. But when the crust shifts, it moves that cold area into a warm area, moves it closer to the equator, makes all the ice melt, and meanwhile new ice starts to form on the new pole. That theory explains the meltdown of the Ice Age, not as a result of climate change, but as a result of cataclysmic Earth movements.
And that explains also ancient maps of Iceland and Greenland.
It does. I think the maps are a very important question, which I do not see any academic providing a good answer to. There are maps. Almost always, these maps turn out to be copies of earlier maps. The Piri Reis map is a famous example. He was a Turkish admiral, and he tells us actually in his own handwriting on the fragment of the map that has survived that he based it was a world map, we've only got one corner of it, that he based it on more than 100 source maps, none of which have survived. This was the case with the Orontius Phineas map and some of the Mercator maps as well, that they were drawing on ancient maps which didn't come down to us. So these maps were drawn within relatively recent history, within the last 1,000 years, but they were copying much older maps.
Many
So-
thousand years
Many
old.
thousand years older. And so it's very interesting when we find anomalies on these maps. For example, our culture discovered Antarctica in 1818. Before that, maps that were being drawn around 1800, they showed an empty hole where Antarctica is. But if you go back to the 1500s, the 1400s, when they were copying these older maps that haven't come down to us, you find Antarctica on every single one of them.
That's incredible.
On every single one of them. And it's kind of a bit bigger than it is now, and it comes close to and almost touches South America, just as it did during the last Ice Age. You find off the coast of Ireland a little circular island with the legend on it. It's called High Brazil. That island is about 120 miles west of the West Irish coast. If you look at sea level rise, you find that 12,000 years ago and earlier, an island of exactly that size and exactly that shape existed in exactly that spot. And it was covered by rising sea levels
12,000 years
ago. And it shows up on this map like a ghost. And that has to mean that somebody was around 12,000 years ago who had at least developed sufficient technology to explore the world and map it accurately.
And a flood killed all that.
And a flood destroyed it all.
You're convinced of the flood?
Like I say, I'm not here with a belief system.
The evidence
I'm
points.
here with anomalies and problems in the mainstream model, and what the evidence suggests to me very, very strongly is that those cataclysmic Earth changes at the end of the Ice Age, and even regardless whether a pole shift or a crustal displacement was involved, nobody can dispute that the meltdown of the Ice Age was a cataclysmic event.
Were you excited? I'm sorry.
It involved huge amounts of volcanic activity, and it involved these tremendous releases of water. So the ice would actually accumulate in glacial lakes for thousands of years. It would melt, slowly melt, and then suddenly, this is the mainstream model, suddenly the banks of the ice dam that held back that water would burst, and the whole mass of 4,000 years of meltwater would pour down into the world ocean in one moment. And the water descending from the top of the ice cap would reach speeds of 600 miles an hour, and it were a wave height of close to 1,000 feet. It then tears across the landscape that lies below the ice cap. And you see this still, the Scablands of New Jersey, the Finger Lakes of New York State. These are the results of those massive outburst floods that then tear across the land, and then pour into the water, and whoosh, up goes sea level.
Whoa. Holy shit. Could you imagine a 1,000-foot-high wave just tearing across the entire continent?
It happened.
It definitely happened.
It definitely happened. Mainstream science is not in disagreement on that.
How excited were you about the discovery of Atlantis? Do you buy into that 100%?
Well, Atlantis for me is one of thousands of traditions about a high episode of human civilization in remote antiquity, destroyed when that civilization angered the gods. That is a universal story. It's told everywhere. And the Atlantis story is better understood as part of that worldwide tradition rather than viewed in isolation. It's very interesting. The Atlantis story comes to us from the Greek philosopher Plato. He is the earliest source of the Atlantis myth, if it's a myth. And he sets out information about Atlantis in two of his dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias. And what he says is that this information came to him through an elder figure who's called Solon, a Greek lawmaker who existed about 100 years before the time of Plato, but was in Plato's family. And the information had been passed down to Plato. Solon had received the information from priests in Egypt. They'd told him about Atlantis. This is how Plato tells the story. And when Plato tells the story, he actually puts a date on the submergence of Atlantis, and that date is 9,000 years before the time of Solon. That means 9,600 BC. That means 11,500 years ago, and we're right there in that window when the Ice Age is melting down and hell is being unleashed on Earth. And if Plato made it all up, I really need to understand how he got the date right.
It's amazing. What a beautiful way of putting it, that we are a species with amnesia. And it's really almost, I mean, when you stop and think about it, how does one keep records over 12, 15,000 years with giant cataclysmic events where people are, for many generations, scratching and scrounging, just trying to stay alive like animals?
Very difficult.
You know?
And monumental architecture may be one way of doing it. The notion that the pyramids and the Sphinx were laid out on the ground to model an ancient sky and thus define a date using 4 constellations, which were Leo, Aquarius, Draco, and Orion. Using those 4 constellations to define a date seems like a kind of exotic idea, but we have that right here in the United States in the Hoover Dam. There is a star map built into the architecture of the Hoover Dam, and that star map freezes the sky above the Hoover Dam at the moment the Hoover Dam was completed. And the purpose of putting that star map there by the man who originated it was precisely this. He said, in 10,000 years' time, if our civilization is lost and our language is lost and nobody can read our documents, when they come across this structure by looking at the star map, they will be able to know when it was created.
God damn. How crazy is that? And it's all based on the precession of the equinoxes.
It's based on the precession, which gives you this universal, beautifully mathematical cycle.
And we got to think that if people think like that today, they must have thought like that back then. If the civilization had, in some totally different and alien way than our own, I mean, so alien that their writing was images, you know. I mean, Egypt is, that's one of the things that I really got out of John Anthony West's DVD series, was he really kind of gets you to understand how different their culture and society was than ours. The way they just the way they read things. They read things, you know, it was all like Shell, Nike, you know, Reebok. I mean, they saw things in images. That was their language. Their language was images. It's such a bizarre and different way to even think about existence.
Yeah, very different. And the important thing for me to remember about the ancient Egyptians is this was a culture that devoted its best minds, you know, for 3,000 years to considering the mystery of life, what this is about, and the mystery of death.
We lost so much in that burning of the Library of Alexandria, right? Like,
goodness knows what we lost.
Who knows what
the
they
whole
knew.
heritage of the human race went down in that.
It's so incredible. We're left with this framework, these stone things to try to deconstruct the past, and even people, I mean, they have a certain amount of information and they say, we're done, we figured it out.
Yeah.
Just the idea that they can put a date to it. And haven't they dated the pyramids just sort of based on carbon and things that were left behind? That doesn't necessarily mean that people didn't move
very
into the
odd.
pyramids at 2500 BC? Like, do they know the exact date?
No, there's not much to go on. You can't carbon date stone, but you can carbon date organic material, and in the mortar between the stones there's some organic material, and the carbon dating on that is really puzzling. It doesn't make the pyramid 12,000 years old, but it makes it 1,000 years older than it's supposed to be at the top, and 400 years older than it's supposed to be at the bottom. Go figure that out.
Huh.
You'd think they build from the bottom up, not the other way down. And this says nothing about the core structure of the pyramid. It only says about the outer facade.
How does that work?
I don't think we can take the pyramid away entirely from the ancient Egyptians. The ancient Egyptians were massively involved in the pyramid project. But I think the pyramid project is one of those two-phase projects. And the view I put forward is that the original site was laid out around 10,500 BC by the survivors of a lost civilization. The subterranean aspects of the Great Pyramid, specifically the subterranean chamber, was created at that time. The gigantic megalithic structures, the Valley Temple, the so-called mortuary temples that stand beside the pyramids, which seem so different in terms of their architecture, which have, in some cases, blocks of stone weighing 200 tons and many blocks of stone weighing 100 tons in them. That this was the first phase, and that then I would suggest what happened was that those survivors of a lost civilization established something like a monastery at Giza. And they then started to recruit from the local population, so that within a generation or two, they were all Egyptians anyway, but they were trained in a system of knowledge, and that they kept that system of knowledge close and tight and passed it down for thousands of years. The idea of knowledge being transmitted for 4,000 years is actually not too difficult to take. It's already happened. We have that with some of our existing religions, which go back close to 4,000 years. There's no reason why it shouldn't have happened. And then at a certain point, this monastic institution switched Egyptian civilization on with all the high knowledge that they had preserved, and that's why it's so perfect at the beginning.
And no one else was able to do that at that time anywhere else in the world.
Not in the way the Egyptians did. It was quite unique.
Just a magical series of events and.
Yeah. I mean, the Great Pyramid is a magical thing. It's magical.
Yeah, I can't even
I've been
imagine.
privileged to climb it 5 times. I've been into every known chamber and passageway in the Great Pyramid.
Tell me about the King's Chamber, because that is the freakiest thing of all. And for people that don't know, they've proven that some of the stones in the King's Chamber were from a quarry. How many 100 miles away?
Close to 700 miles south.
These are like 500 tons. These giant stones.
They come from Aswan.
How tall were they? How much do they weigh?
The heaviest stones in the pyramid weigh about 70 tons.
70
tons. Though, so you're talking about the weight of 35 large family cars. Roughly. If a large family car weighs 2 tons, that's 35 of them in the equivalent of the heavier blocks in the Great Pyramid.
Yeah, and it's between like 2 tons and like that. 2 tons and 70 tons, is that what it is?
What kind of truck would you need now to move a stone? There's trucks that can
Oh
do
yeah,
that.
Yeah,
definitely are. We can do it. We can do it, but it's hard, and to do it again and again and again and again and again, and to do it with incredible precision, and to align the whole structure that you're building within 3/60ths of a single degree of true north. That's really hard.
And also
to do.
note, from that quarry to the pyramids, there wasn't a paved road. There wasn't a highway. There wasn't gas stations.
So if they've got these 50-ton blocks of solid granite, what are they doing? They put them on boats? I mean, how are they getting these things 500? Did you say 700 miles?
They were
Is that what you
definitely
said?
shipping them. They were definitely shipping them down the Nile. That's what they were doing.
It's hard to even wrap your head around the fact that people were communicating from 700 miles away that long ago.
Right.
Yeah.
That they were doing it, moving giant stones into place for some crazy asshole that wanted a huge pyramid. Imagine the people working at the quarry. This crazy bitch wants a 50-ton rock. You believe we got to chop this thing up?
Are you kidding? I'd like to see the person who tried to talk him out of it at first. There was like a few people like, "Yo,
Like, listen, man, I have a hut. It's made out of wood. It's awesome. You don't need to do this.
I need this pyramid.
The interesting thing is,
Have
that
another drink.
the Egyptians didn't devote that kind of architecture or energy to their daily lives. Their houses were quite simple. They devoted it to their sacred architecture, and they were perfect in everything they did. I come out of all of this just with a sense of the mystery, the majesty, and the awe of our lost past, and the fact that we do need to know who we are and where we came from. We do need to recover our memories. Part of the reason we're so fucked up is because we just have got no idea what the fuck we're doing.
We've woken up in the middle of history.
Yeah.
Duncan and I were talking about this before. If there was a time machine, what time would you like to go back? And we went back and forth from caveman days. I'd like to see some cavemen to Egypt. I think I'd like to see Egypt. I would love to see Egypt in its prime, to see what the fuck was going on there. You know, what was that like when it was in full bloom and the pyramids had just been created, and just this strange civilization, a super advanced civilization, had just risen far and beyond anything else on the planet.
Let's build that time machine right now.
And with that note, thank you very much, sir. This has been an amazing conversation, a huge honor. And please follow Graham on Twitter. It's a _ after Graham, GRAHAM _ Hancock. And you got to do the _ because if you go to _ some asshole has your name. You know, Twitter will give you Graham Hancock if someone has that.
There is another Graham Hancock.
Is he a guy?
Yeah.
Oh, you should ask him. Hook you up.
He is. And the website is
GrahamHancock.com.
A lot of information.
And
I have my YouTube channel. That's also.
Oh, you have a YouTube channel?
Yeah.
What is that?
It's linked through the website. It's GrahamHancock.com channel or something like that.
And to get started on Graham, if you've got to get this, Fingerprints of the Gods. It's one of my all-time favorite books. If I was leaving and going to go on the space station for the rest of my life, I'd bring that one with me, for sure. It's amazing. Thank you so much for being here. I cannot thank you enough. This has been an amazing treat that the internet has brought us together.
Thank you.
Awesome.
I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you, brother.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Cheers.